Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Grid Buzz podcast, where we will be doing driver ratings on the Monaco GP. So as talked about during the race review, the Monaco GP gave us what the Monaco GP has typically given us the last couple years, with a couple different variations. They tried to introduce the mandatory two-stop strategy and using all three tire compounds, with also a step softer tire compound similar to Imola, running the C6, C5, and C4, which did add some excitement in some ways, but overall I think can be chalked up as a failure. It didn't really work. We did see, the front runners, like the top 4 or 5, kind of at certain points of the race running at a faster pace, where, obviously last year we basically saw Charles executing the strategy where he backed up the entire field. We didn't necessarily see that. This year, we did see them at times moving at a fairly decent race pace. At other times, like at the end with Max Verstappen, when he was waiting for the potential red flag to get him on the top step of the podium, he was then backing all of them up. But through most of the race, they were holding a decent race pace. Maybe not all out, but better than what we've seen in the last couple years. However, if you go back to the midfield and back, you saw what you typically see out of a Monaco GP, and in some ways worse, because they had to squeeze in 2 pit stops this time. And so the team strategy, the team game was almost elongated a little bit. We saw that with Lawson and Hadjar, where, Lawson was backing up the crowd quite a bit. And then we saw it very prevalent with the Williams team, with Sainz originally doing it for Albon. And then when Albon got his pit stops in, Sainz and Albon swapped. And then you saw Albon doing it for Sainz. And then once that was done, they swapped to give Albon back the lead position. And overall, that was just pretty messy and not what you want to see in, the pinnacle of motorsport, which is F1, at probably the most prestigious, iconic track in all of Formula One, of Monaco, one of the few circuits that was on the original Formula One season back in whatever that was, like the early 50s, I think it was. So there's definitely a problem with this Grand Prix. Unfortunately, the cars in recent generations, especially since the hybrid era, have just gotten so big and so heavy that it's just not really a viable track for Formula One cars in the modern era anymore. I don't really know what is going to be the solution to that problem. They had talked about, they tried the mandatory 2-stop pit stop strategy this year. They had talked about, potentially setting some sort of minimum delta time so that drivers weren't going slow. The race director decided against that this year, which I'm glad that he did. Maybe they'll try it next year. Although, we saw throughout the race, once again, that there was times when the pack was, 5 seconds off the delta of the fastest car on track, and drivers still weren't able to overtake. So even implementing a lap time delta by the race director, I'm not sure that's really going to solve the problems based on how we saw everything play out this year. Maybe they check the telemetry to see if people are erratically braking, and they've set some rules around that. I don't really know. Hopefully they're able to solve this outside of going back to more similar to our older generation of cars, bring back the V10, make the car smaller. Outside of that, I really don't know how to solve this race. And with that, we will go into our driver ratings, but there's not a lot to rate on this GP outside of a few drivers. Most of the positions that you see gained, especially out of the midfield and the back of the pack, were due to things that happened in front of them, retirements, crashes, whatever, and not so much overtakes. I mean, there was a little bit of that for at least a couple drivers, or some good strategy decisions to put them up the field, but largely a bit of a boring race, unfortunately. But diving into our driver ratings, we will start out with the Kick Sauber team, and we've got Gabriel Bortoleto. I think a bit of an underwhelming season for the F2 champion so far this year. He's obviously on Kick Sauber. It's not a great team, so it's hard to get a judgment of where exactly he is compared to other rookies, because it is the worst car on the grid. But it has been a pretty lackluster season. I would say it was more of that at the Monaco GP. I gave him a rating of a 5. So he qualified 16th, and then he had that lap 1 incident. He actually had a pretty nice overtake around the outside on Kimi. And then Kimi, came back at him, dove up the inside, and, he tried to go double wide into the corner, into the tunnel, and just drove it straight into the wall. Obviously, he was able to recover the car, luckily get it back to the pits, get a new front wing put on, and finish the race. But I definitely think a rookie error on that move, because there's just no way that you're getting 2 cars double wide around that corner, and I feel like he probably should have known that. He did gain 2 positions throughout the race and ended up finishing P14, but overall pretty lackluster performance again from Bortoleto. Moving over to Nico Hülkenberg, I actually rated him worse than Bortoleto in this GP, so I gave him a 4. He did out-qualify Bortoleto, which Hülkenberg is kind of a qualifying specialist, so you would think that would play out in his favor a little bit here on a qualifying track where there was very little movement among drivers unless there were people who crashed or retired in front of them, or, they happened to jump someone in a pit stop. There wasn't very many on-track overtakes. And so with that, you'd think that would put Nico kind of up in a good position. However, it was a very under the race radar for Nico, starting 13th. Which I think is a pretty good starting place given where that car is. But he ended up losing 3 spots and finishing 16th, actually finishing behind Bortoleto, who crashed his car on lap 1 and had to go into the pit and switch out a front wing. So overall, I that's a big reason that I'm rating Nico Hülkenberg as a 4 and lower than Bortoleto, is just given that whole dynamic and his experience and the fact that he didn't crash and have to pit and all of that. Like, he should have finished ahead and he didn't. So giving Nico Hülkenberg a 4 on the weekend. Moving over to the Alpine team, who also had a very rough weekend. Their car did not do well here. Doesn't like the curbs, doesn't like the kind of bumpiness of the circuit. And so moving into Franco Colapinto, another little bit of an underwhelming performance out of him. Once again, hopping into not the best car in the grid, no preseason testing, no first couple races, trying to get his bearings a little bit. So got to give him some leeway here, but I'm giving Franco Colapinto a 5. He qualified dead last at 20th, getting knocked out in Q1. So not a great qualifying performance at all. He ended up starting 17th though, gained some positions due to Behrman's penalty. And then throughout the race, he did actually move up to 13th, which is not bad actually to start where he started and finish 13th. But once again, there was a number of retirements. There was incidents that happened. So there was things that kind of helped him jump the order a little bit. And so that wasn't really all on track overtakes or things that he specifically did. It's just, he kept his nose out of trouble during the race and benefited from other people who didn't keep their nose out of trouble, or people who just had mechanical issues like Alonso. So giving Franco Colapinto a 5 for the weekend. Moving into Pierre Gasly, an even more disappointing weekend. I'm giving him a 4. So he qualified 18th, a little bit ahead of his rookie teammate Colapinto, but really struggled. Talked about how the car is just not a fit for this track at all. It's terrible over the bumps and curbs, and so it just was not well suited for this car. On top of the fact that this car just isn't that great to begin with. Red Bull, for example, is not that great over the curbs and bumpiness of Monaco, but at least their car is, it's hard to say. Some people will say it's the second fastest car. Some people say it's the 4th fastest car. At the beginning of the season, some people joke that it was the 8th fastest car. It's really hard to tell where that car is, but it's definitely not on par with the Alpine. It's a better car than that. And even though it struggles on circuits like this, the Alpine both struggles on circuits like Monaco and is just not good either. So it's the perfect storm kind of coming at Alpine this weekend. Also, Gasly making that critical mistake, slamming into the back of Yuki Tsunoda, ending his race, bringing out the yellow flags, potentially a VSC and full safety car, which I'm glad did not happen. But Gasly, pretty underwhelming weekend, starting P18, DNFing because he slammed into the back of Yuki Tsunoda. Yeah, not a great weekend for Gasly at all. And so we are giving him a 4 on the weekend. Moving into Aston Martin, underwhelming weekend on a number of fronts. Could have been not an underwhelming weekend, but unfortunately, the Alonso curse continues. But before we get into that, Lance Stroll, I'm giving him a 4 as well. There's a lot of 4s this week. Maybe that's a little bit unfair. It's hard to tell though, because I do think that there was a lot of underperformance across a number of drivers. But on a track like this, it's also hard to make up for previous mistakes that were made because it is so hard to overtake. And so maybe I'm being a little bit unfair with the 4s, but I do feel like there was a lot of underwhelming performances across the board, and Lance Stroll fits one of those. So Stroll qualified 19th and then also received a 4-place grid penalty. Qualifying 19th when your teammate qualifies 7th is not a good look. Not a good look at all. Super far off the pace. So, starting in the back in Monaco when qualifying is so important, clearly that car had the potential for top 10. Qualifying is not a good performance on Stroll. Starting 19th, finishing 15th, so gaining 4 positions throughout the race, but really not doing anything notable to drive those increase in places. Lance Stroll closing out the weekend with another underwhelming performance. Moving into Fernando Alonso. I'm giving Fernando Alonso an 8 on the weekend, even though he DNF'd. Blinding fast qualifying in that Aston Martin, qualifying 7th place, way out qualifying his teammate Lance Stroll by a mile. Also performing really well in the race before he had the DNF. He was holding 6th place all the way through the GP. He moved up 1 spot because of Hamilton's penalty. So he was on track for some good points, a really good finish, and then it all came tumbling down. Alonso, having the string of luck that Alonso has been having, had an electronic recovery system glitch, mechanical issue, I believe it was with that system. Whatever it is, it did cause him to DNF on the race on lap 38, which is super unfortunate given this is the worst start to a Formula One campaign for Fernando Alonso in the last 10 years, having scored no points through the beginning of the season. Largely not to his fault at all. There's been a number of instances where he was on track for some good points and mechanical errors, people running into him, whatever it may be. It's just been a super rough start to the season, and hoping we can see that potentially turn around for him as the season goes on. If it doesn't, I guess it won't be the worst in the world because they'll get some more wind tunnel time for Newey to hopefully improve that car for the next generation of cars and hopefully get Alonso a car that is actually competitive and potentially maybe even podium worthy, similar to the car back in, I believe that was 2023 when Aston Martin started the season pretty hot. Alonso ended up on the podium a couple times, and then, the car fell off a pretty steep cliff on the back half of the season, unfortunately. But under, Newey's technical prowess, hopefully the next generation of cars will give Alonso that maybe not championship contending car. I would be surprised if that were to happen, but at least top of the grid, top 3-4 teams type car where he hasn't had that the last couple years outside of the beginning of the 2023 season. But overall, giving Fernando Alonso an 8 on the weekend, even though he did not finish the race. Moving over into the Racing Bulls. So I think this is a team that overall had a really good weekend. Probably one of the biggest winners of the weekend from a team perspective and individual driver perspective as well. Liam Lawson, I am giving him an 8 on the weekend. I think this was his best drive of the season so far. Probably not his best drive ever. If I recall correctly, I believe it was Singapore last year, where he out-qualified even the Red Bull Racing team and had an overall really good GP, but definitely the best race of his, what has been up until this point, lackluster season for Lawson so far this year. So a solid 8 on his performance, having qualified P9, having effectively played the team game for Isaac Hadjar, backing up the field, giving him some free pit stops so that he could have a really, really good race result for the rookie. And then all while doing that, gaining 1 spot once again, Alonso's retirement. So nothing that he specifically did to gain that position, but still moving up from P9 to P8, I think is a really good result in that Racing Bull car, and especially for Lawson given his form throughout most of the season. So giving Lawson an 8. And then moving over to Isaac Hadjar. I mentioned this last week. It's hard to say who is the rookie of the season. Antonelli putting it on sprint pole back in the Miami GP was pretty impressive. I was having a bit of a debate though, is Antonelli the rookie of the season? Is Isaac Hadjar the rookie of the season? I would say after this performance this week, and anything can change by the end of the season, but I would clearly put Isaac Hadjar as rookie of the season at this point so far. A very solid performance out of the rookie, having qualified P6. He's been pretty blindingly fast in qualifying through a number of the GPs this year. This carried through here again. He did have some mistakes where he hit the wall twice in practice, but was able to clean those up and deliver the qualifying performance that he needed to deliver on a track where qualifying performance is so important. And then he was able to move up into the 5th position due to Hamilton's 3-place grid penalty that he received for impeding during qualifying. He did lose 1 position during the race, so he qualified P6, started P5 because of Hamilton's grid place penalty, and then finished P6. So did lose a spot, but overall, really, really good performance out of Isaac Hadjar for the weekend. And I think definitely rookie of the season. At this point, I don't even think it's really a debate. The only thing that casts some shadow over that would be the fact that Antonelli was able to, qualify pole on the sprint race for the Miami GP. But still, I think Isaac Hadjar has been Mr. Consistent for the most part, other than crashing out at the beginning of the year at the Australia GP during the warm-up laps. That was obviously a pretty huge mistake, but outside of that has performed at an extremely high level. And I think even Isaac Hadjar is putting some pressure on Yuki Tsunoda for the Red Bull Racing team seat for next year. I don't think anything will happen this year. I think Yuki's pretty safe. He has some time to kind of turn things around and prove that he's the one that deserves that seat. But Isaac Hadjar is putting on a pretty impressive performance. And I would imagine if Yuki stays on the form that he's on and Isaac stays on the form that he's on, that there will be some pretty serious conversations heading into next season on who will take that secondary seat. And I think Isaac could definitely be the one to take it. And if he were to take it, I don't know what would happen with Yuki, to be honest. I can't see them moving Yuki back down to Racing Bulls at this stage in his career, given how long he's already been on the team and how experienced he is, and how it's really supposed to be a junior team. So I would imagine if that were to happen, that Yuki would have to find a seat next season. Moving into Haas, probably the most inconsistent team this year. Think I can think of any other team who's had as many ups and downs. In some races, they look like they have the pace. In some races, they are absolutely nowhere. This is one of the races where they definitely looked like they had the pace. So starting out with Oliver Behrman, I'm giving him a 7 on the weekend. He did qualify 17th, but the statement there was that because he had that 10-place grid penalty for overtaking under a red flag during practice, which some people argued was an extremely harsh penalty. Other people argued, the rules are the rules. And even though that's harsh and unfortunate, it is what it is. He decided not to keep pushing in Q1 out of fear for potentially knocking out Ocon. So what was said was this was a team strategy that he didn't go in and set another lap, which led him to qualifying P17, but appeared to have quite a bit more pace in that car. And I think that did show through in the race, because while he qualified P17, had the 10-place grid penalty, so started P20, he did finish P12. So with a lot of the other drivers on the grid, they gained significantly due to retirements, crashes, some pit strategy, things like that. While Behrman did get some positions due to strategy, he just overall had pace in that race. At the beginning of the race, when he pitted early under the VSC, he was moving at 5 seconds a lap faster than the leader of the race. And so some of that is typical Monaco shenanigans of drivers slowing down, but it did show that Behrman had true pace in that car, and moving up from P20 to P12 in Monaco, regardless of, the retirements and some of its strategy and all of that, is pretty impressive out of the rookie. And so I am giving Oliver Behrman a 7 on the weekend. I think this had the potential to be a lot higher, but because of that 10-place grid penalty for overtaking under the red flag, which was a huge error, giving him a 7. Moving into Esteban Ocon, though, I think this is another one similar to Lawson. Probably Ocon's best performance of the year was definitely Lawson's. I think it's also Ocon's best performance of the year. The Haas definitely looked like it had pace, like I said, with Behrman qualifying P8, which is a really good starting spot for that car, and then finishing P7. So once again, nothing too crazy happening during the actual race itself for Ocon, but a very, very great qualifying position, and then gaining one position due to Alonso's retirement and finishing P7 and bringing home some good points for Haas. Some very, very good and very important points for Haas, given how up and down they are at certain circuits. And so I am giving Ocon a 9 on the weekend. Now moving over to the Williams team, who's had a pretty good resurgence in performance over the last 3 races, this year as a whole, but definitely the last 3 races. Carlos Sainz, I'm giving him a 7. So he did fail to make Q3, qualifying P11, but did finish P10 after gaining one position during the race, and was able to effectively execute the team strategy, which significantly helped Albon throughout the race, leading to a Williams double points. My crazy prediction was that Williams were going to secure another top 5 finish at the Monaco GP. That didn't happen, unfortunately. I do think that Albon maybe had the pace to place a qualifying start in top 5 and maybe P5, P4 position. Didn't really put it all together, unfortunately. But double points for Williams is obviously something that they will always take, given their experience and history over the last couple years. And Sainz played a critical role in that, playing the team game. And so giving him a 7 for his team performance, but also scoring points on the weekend for Williams. Moving into Alexander Albon, I'm giving him an 8 on the weekend. Albon qualified 10th, but he did call out how he was a little bit confused at his qualifying pace in Q3 when he had such good qualifying pace in Q2. I'm not really sure what happened there. It sounds like Albon isn't really sure what happened there either. But once again, Albon also effectively executed team strategy after Sainz and Albon swapped positions, so that Albon could return the favor to Sainz and give him some free pit stops, and ultimately lead to the double points finish and really frustrate Russell throughout the process, leading to that drive-through penalty for him. But he also did gain one position once again from Alonso's retirement, so finishing P9. It was overall, I would say, a pretty boring race for the Williams team, but it was effective. And so giving them both a 7 and an 8 for the weekend. Moving into our Ferrari boys, Lewis Hamilton, I'm giving a 7. So he did qualify P4, but then received a 3-place grid penalty for impeding. Ended up starting P7 and then made a few positions up and finished P5, but was about a minute back from Lando, Oscar, Max, Leclerc. So was pretty far off the front 4. Some of that was obviously him just being held up in the pack from some of the team games and midfield games that were going on. So it wasn't all his fault, but I will say that Hamilton just did not look on pace with Leclerc at all through this weekend. It's hard to tell if there was more pace in that car or if it was just Leclerc doing typical Leclerc Monaco magic. I can't really say. I will say that a lot of other teams, including Andrea from McLaren, stated that they thought that Ferrari would have pace at this circuit because the car typically likes to run a bit higher, which is a disadvantage at most circuits. But here, where you have to run the cars higher and the Ferrari is set up to do that, that is a bit of an advantage. And having what a lot of people have said is superior mechanical grip, where there's not a lot of aerodynamic downforce coming into play, also helps here. So I do think Leclerc did his magic, but I do think that there was also more pace in the Ferrari, if I had to guess. Qualifying P4 is not bad. Starting P7 because of the grid penalties, unfortunate. Making it back up to P5, once again, not bad, but giving Hamilton an overall 7 for the weekend. Leclerc, the home favorite, unfortunately missing out on pole position by a 10th, so qualifying P2. I am giving him a 9 on the weekend. I think Leclerc honestly executed the weekend as good as he could have possibly executed it. That McLaren just has a lot of pace in the car. I think Andrea even came out and said that even though Lando qualified P1 and set a track record, that there was actually more pace in that car after they looked at kind of the data and telemetry. So I don't think there was much more for Leclerc to do there. He executed an absolutely perfect weekend. I could even say I could potentially give him a 10, but because he didn't finish on the top step, I'm giving him a 9. But overall, really, really solid weekend for Leclerc. I wish he was on the top step. I know he wishes he was on the top step, but he commented, even being on the podium at Monaco is a great experience for him. And so giving him a 9 for the weekend. Moving into Red Bull. Difficult weekend for Red Bull all around. I think starting out with Yuki Tsunoda, I'm giving him a 4. I think I did call Yuki Tsunoda out as my flop for the weekend, and I do think that is exactly where Yuki Tsunoda landed. Qualifying 12th, but then finishing 17th. And then qualifying 12th when Verstappen qualified 4th. It's just not a good look. Yuki looked pretty good back in the Japanese Grand Prix, but has not looked that great since. Definitely going to get some pressure on him from Hadjar, who has been looking great. Granted, this is not a good track for the Red Bull. They don't like the bumps. They don't like the curbs. It's a difficult car to drive, says basically everyone in the grid. So I do feel for Yuki, but qualifying 12th when your teammate qualified 4th and then finishing 17th when your teammate finished 4th is a terrible look. I could even justify maybe going for a 3 for Yuki, honestly. Not a great weekend, not a great look for him at all. Hopefully he's able to bounce back during the next GP and get some good points and good results for Red Bull Racing and prove that he does deserve that seat for a more long-term tenure, because right now I don't think he's doing the job, and his ways maybe outperforming Lawson, but they didn't move Yuki into the seat to give the performances that he's been giving the last few races. Moving down to Max Verstappen though, I'm giving him an 8. I do think a 4th place finish for Verstappen is generally an underwhelming place for him to finish, but I think he maximize the car this weekend. The Red Bull is just not set up for Monaco. It does not have the pace. And even under the hands of Verstappen, who is able to kind of pull out these miracles at a number of tracks this season, really wasn't able to do that. Maybe you can call P4 for this car at this track a miracle. Maybe you think not, but regardless, I do think that he maximized what the car had potential for during the weekend. Had to play a little bit of the red flag strategy, hoping to have that save his race, which did not come to fruition. So I think 4th was probably the best spot that he could have. And so I am giving Verstappen an 8 on the weekend. Moving into Mercedes, they are probably another team that's one of the biggest losers on the weekend, similar to Alpine. Overall, not a great performance. Kimi Antonelli crashing the car over the weekend and then qualifying 15th. Not a great look at all. Not really able to get the car under control into the C6 compound. He really struggled on the super soft. Did not really look good in the race overall. Got overtaken by Bortoleto on lap 1. Was able to do a re-overtake, which forced Bortoleto into the wall. But being so much on the back foot at a team like Mercedes over Monaco weekend is just not a good look, not a good finish. So I did give Antonelli a 4. But moving over into Russell, I also think an extremely underwhelming weekend, unfortunately. Russell qualifying 14th. Although supposedly that was due to an electrical issue that happened in Q2, which put him on the back foot, which is super unfortunate for a track like Monaco where qualifying is so important, and then having that super frustrating day behind the Williams team getting backed up. We saw He was very animated over the team radio, eventually cutting the chicane, overtaking Albon, receiving a drive-through penalty as a result, and then receiving another drive-through penalty at the end of the race. Just not a good performance out of the Mercedes team at all, no matter how you measure it. Just probably one of the biggest losers on the weekend overall, and has allowed Red Bull and Ferrari both to kind of creep back up on them in the Constructor Championship. They had a decent lead for a while, but now they're only a couple points out front of both of those teams if they don't turn things around, at risk of being overtaken in the Constructors. And I think it's only like a 5 or 7 point spread takes them from second in the Constructors to fourth in the Constructors. And when you have a team like Ferrari, who has Hamilton and Leclerc, who are consistently putting up points, that's a dangerous place to be in. You know, Red Bull Racing obviously really only has one driver putting up points, but it's Max Verstappen, who's always at the very front of the field and consistently scores more points than other teams with two good drivers combined. So Mercedes is in a bit of a dangerous position of being passed up in the Constructors, especially after such a lackluster weekend at Monaco. So finishing off with Antonelli with a 4 and George Russell with a 5. Then moving over into McLaren. Really solid weekend for McLaren. Probably could have delivered the 1-2, but Oscar just was a little bit on the back foot this weekend. Didn't look as good as he did last year at Monaco, where he looked quicker than Lando. Lando definitely looked quicker than him this year, which allowed Lando also to close quite a few points in the World Drivers' Championship to Oscar. So Oscar only has a couple point lead, but I am giving Oscar an 8 on the weekend. So qualifying P3, finishing P3, executing the team strategy as well as he could, but he did get affected a little bit with a slow pit stop. There was maybe an opportunity to undercut Leclerc with the pit stop. I'm glad that it didn't happen, but the slow pit stop didn't help. At the end of the race, was able to kind of catch up to Leclerc and put some pressure on him to help out Lando. You know, Lando was obviously calling for that over the radio of, I need Piastri to come up and help, as Verstappen was backing up Lando into Leclerc. So I think it was a decently executed weekend for Oscar. It was nothing special. Qualifying P3, finishing P3. So I'm giving him an 8. It's hard to give a driver lower than an 8 for any sort of podium finish, to be honest. But one interesting stat about Oscar Piastri is that with him finishing on the podium and scoring more points, he has 34 consecutive race weekends where he has scored points, which is the 3rd longest all time. So Oscar Piastri, Mr. Consistent, doing what he does best and continuing to put up podium performances, even though, you know, that car probably should have been P2, but at least he put it on the podium. However, did lose significant points in the World Drivers' Championship to Lando, who is now only a couple points behind. So it is, I would say, a little bit of a dangerous position for Piastri, because even though McLaren says that they don't favor one driver over the other, and they definitely can't favor one driver over the other while Oscar Piastri is out front, I think that they would favor Lando if they had the opportunity. And so if Lando's able to get back ahead of Oscar in the Drivers' Championship, if Max Verstappen is able to continue to stay close or even get closer in points, I could see them starting to favor Lando in the Drivers' Championship, which would not be good for Oscar at all. But I think as long as he stays out front, that's not going to happen, and they're going to play the we have two number one driver scenario. And so I do think that it's super critical that Piastri stays out front of Lando from a points perspective, and this weekend did not help there. Now moving over into Lando Norris to close us out, giving him a 10 on the weekend. Absolutely flawlessly executed weekend, putting the car on pole, breaking the track record, executing the race strategy and everything just to perfection. Absolutely no drops, no mistakes outside of the turn 1, lap 1 lockup, which I thought was going to be a big mistake and I was hoping would give Leclerc the lead, or at least flat spot his tires and give him some problems. Unfortunately, that's not what happened, and Lando was able to continue continue to flawlessly execute on the weekend. He also, at the end of the race, proved that he had more pace in the car. So when Verstappen was backing him up, or the last few laps, it looked like, maybe Leclerc had the pace. Leclerc was the fastest person, deserved to win, but didn't have the qualifying position to do so. And then Lando, as soon as he got clean air, took off and opened up a pretty sizable gap in only a lap, which was maybe a bit of a risky, dumb decision. At the end of the day, it panned out. He didn't crash. If he did crash, a lot of people would be all over Lando for making that sort of mistake, but that's not what happened. So was the risk worth it or not? I don't know, but I think he did prove to the rest of the world that he had the pace to win that race, and he deserved to be P1 because he was just moving blindly fast at the end of the race. And so Lando, perfectly executed weekend, giving him a 10. So that closes out our driver ratings for the Monaco GP. I will be back later this week with our Monaco Grand Prix weekend fashion review, and then we will be diving into our race predictions next week as well. So if you enjoyed the episode, go ahead and give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and we will see you later.